Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another edition of our Justice and Pieces guest speaker series. Today, we're joined by Stephen here, who is a bencher at the Law Society and is running for the treasurer position that is coming up, I think, June the 16th. So, first of all, Stephen, maybe thanks for joining us, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about your background, and we'll go from there.
Sure. Good to see you again. For your viewers, the last time I was on with you was actually when I was running to be a bencher. It was about actually a bit more than 2 years ago. So I have 2 years under my belt, and they've been quite interesting, as I know we'll get into. Yeah. So my background, I've actually spent most of my career either in government or in the non-for-profit sector or the regulatory sector. So interesting enough, while not at the Law Society and other professions, mostly the financial services profession or capital markets or just financial services generally, in similar roles to how the Law Society regulates lawyers. So the kind of the core mandate of what a Law Society does wasn't new to me when I was elected to be a bencher. So currently, I'm an adjudicator with Tribunals Ontario. So I do various types of adjudication, both at the Licensing Appeals Tribunal and the Landlord and Tenant Board, and I also sit as part of a, I guess, appointment on the Law Society Tribunal as well. And I guess in addition to those things, I actually sit on another regulatory body. I sit on it's a designated administrative authority. The province has a bunch of those, and I sit on the one for real estate agents. So it's called RECO, the Real Estate Council of Ontario, which, the Law Society is quite a big regulator, but actually RECO is bigger. There's like over like 110,000 real estate agents in the province of Ontario. So obviously very different than lawyers, different regulatory structure, different kind of paths to get there, but again, a lot of similarities. So that's kind of the background that I brought to being a bencher when I was elected a couple of years ago.
Perfect. Thanks for the background there, Stephen. So, first question, I think when everyone's wondering, there is an election for the treasurer. I think, normally it's kind of uh, drama free, right? Usually the person that is the current treasurer just comes back in for their second term. And I think, I mean, I'm not well versed enough on the history, but I believe it's
No, I
just like
think you're right. You're right. Mostly,
acclamation. Not only do we have two people running, we have three people now running.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, what brought about your decision to put your name forward to run for treasurer?
So you're right with respect to your history. Usually, even though it's made clear that the treasurer is elected every year and can serve a 2-year term, it's been the normal course of things that the second year of a treasurer's term, they're usually acclaimed. So, that is, I guess, the precedent. Lawyers love precedent, and that's effectively the precedent. There have been challenges to treasurers in the past. When Malcolm Mercer ran, there was an individual who ran against them. And there's been, I think when Jacqueline ran the first time, there was an individual, maybe when Teresa Donnelly ran. So but those are usually, a lot of times, those are usually in their first year, not their second year. But you ask me why I'm running. I mean, I'll start with saying when I was elected 2 years ago, my goal was obviously to do a good job as a bencher, put my head down, learn how the place works, and contribute, both on, the policy and the regulatory end. And then November happened, and November kind of changed everything. And many of your viewers are probably going to be familiar what happened in November, but November is when Convocation learned that our former treasurer had entered into a new contract with our then CEO, and substantially changed the terms of her employment arrangement. And that issue hadn't been disclosed to Convocation. And there was only a small group of people who were aware of it at the time, and it was brought to us. And if you could have taken a picture, you would have seen a lot of individuals, in quite a degree of shock, and myself included, because again, I've sat on other boards, and one of the core things that you learn in board governance is you have one employee, that's a CEO, and or the executive director, whoever your most senior staff is. And basically, you're responsible for managing that relationship, which obviously includes all aspects of the employment contract. So, when that got brought to our attention, and what subsequently happened over the subsequent months kind of led me to a conclusion that what was going on in convocation and the way things were being shared with benchers, way things were being shared with the legal profession, the way things were being shared with the government, and other things needed to change. We needed to change because what we were doing and why we were doing it was not working. And what I mean why we were doing it, because underlying that was a lack of trust. There was a lack of trust between benchers. And some of this predates even my involvement in convocation, probably goes back to the 2019 election when the SOP slate got elected. And instead of sharing things with convocation, things were withheld convocation because there was a toxic environment. So anyhow, jumping ahead, when I looked at where we were this spring, and I said to myself, okay, you know, we've just had a very difficult period of time, and convocation has had to make some difficult decisions. Are we well positioned to turn the switch and work productively over the next year? Like, are we able to do that? Because I'm kind of mindful that every bencher has a fixed time clock, right? We're elected for a 4 year cycle. We're now 2 years into it. We have 2 years left, but the last year is obviously a pre-election year, so it's, a bit less focused. So I thought to myself, is our current leadership going to take the steps necessary to kind of reset the relationship, to rebuild the trust and restore transparency? And I felt that like I had a different vision than our current treasurer. And I think our current treasurer has made some difficult decisions, many of which I've supported, some of which to be honest with you, I'm not sure I totally did. But I stayed silent about them because I believe in I was going to say cabinet confidentiality, but in this case, convocation confidentiality. And I felt that it was important for us to have a debate, for the benchers to have a debate of how we want to run ourselves over the next, well, year and maybe 2 years. And I wanted to present a different vision of how we could rebuild trust. Um, Among each other, among the profession, with the government, with the public. So my tagline is restoring trust. So that's what I'm trying to do with my plan. So that's why I'm running.
So perhaps maybe you can talk to us more about, restoring trust and that vision that you feel is going to be different from, the current treasurer. Um, and what are some of the ideas you have or action plans you'd like to see implemented if given the role as treasurer?
Yeah. So when I talk to my fellow benchers, I kind of put things into three buckets. I talked about changes in governance and culture. I talked about structural and procedural reforms and operational and strategic priorities. Again, I'll just focus on the first two, and we could talk about the operational ones, but those again are more operational in nature. And I think we do have to change. Leadership's about culture, is about embedding a culture in an organization. And I think, if I were to be elected treasurer, I would change the culture by the actions of what I did. And the first thing I would do was enhance transparency to convocation and in turn enhance transparency to the legal profession. So there's certain types of information that, well, we already talked about the most obvious one, that we weren't shared as far as our former treasurer sharing it. And then, as we've gone through this past year, there's been various information, and I think you're quite familiar with this because of leaks that have gone on. There's various types of information that our treasurer has withheld from convocation because of concern over the leaks. And so my solution is not to withhold information from convocation, but it's the exact opposite. It's to actually share information for convocation so they can make informed governance decisions. And so the public can also know the type of decisions that we make. So my change is to be more transparent, not less transparent, and not to be selectively transparent. And what I mean by that is not share information when it serves us our best interest and keep information confidential when, for example, it wouldn't be positive, but is to share. And the second way I would do that is right now you'll know we have information that's in camera, sorry, in open session, and then we have information that's in camera. So one of the things I would do, I mean, there are certain things that have to be done in camera. Obviously, there's sensitive issues dealing with people's employment contracts and other things, but there's lots of information that we currently hold conversations in camera that could be held in open session. And as you know, I don't know if you watch it, convocation is streamed, so people can see exactly what's going on. And I think that that would enhance transparency. It also would address the issue that some benchers feel is a serious issue, which I do too, for the record, which is the lack of confidentiality on sensitive issues. Because if things are done in open, like open convocation, then there's not an opportunity to leak information because it's out there in the public. So again, it's about a tonal thing, which is, more transparency. It's about a process thing, which is more open access. And then this may sound like inside baseball for people who aren't in convocation, but when I was first elected a bencher, I was told all the important work happens in committees. Like convocation approves things, you do debate things, but you get into the nitty gritty of policies and committees. But our committee compositions haven't always been equitable among benchers and diverse the way that they should be. And I mean, a perfect example of that, which is public, is we had the compensation committee, which wasn't exactly a particularly diverse and representative committee. And obviously, the O'Connor report talks about some of the decisions that they made. So so it's important that our committees are diverse, and diverse is not just equity diversity, that is obviously a measure of diversity, but diverse in geographic, diverse in gender, diverse in practice types. So we get different types of perspectives at committees. And I always talk about this, and I don't think that the Jewish community is the only one who has this, but I grew up in a Jewish household where we always debated things and always debated things in front of our parents. And ultimately, my parents got to make the decisions. But I believe in a good open debate because I feel through good open debate, you make better decisions. So I actually want to encourage debate, respectful debate, but I want to encourage debate. So that's like that's done through having different compositions on committees and also facilitating enough time for that to happen. So, I mean, those are some of the things in the governance and the culture standpoint that I would address. Do you want me to talk about some other things, or do you have another question? I can go on, as you can probably tell.
Yeah, I wanted. I mean, maybe it's a good time to kind of jump in here with the question that that kind of comes up. We have it's not akin to the party politics of federal and provincial elections, but some people, or quite a lot of people, I think, kind of paint the Good Governance Coalition as I think we're like-minded people who ran together. But does that I mean, I think the criticism might be, well, no, isn't this just a different brand of the same thing with respect to anyone from the coalition? Like, I think maybe it's like, how unique are the perspectives of those who ran together? Because a lot of people paint you with the same brush, right? As to,
Right.
well, what's the difference between Stephen and Peter? Because this was their platform, and
Yeah.
is he any different than uh, Kim coming on another
Yeah.
year?
So I think the first thing that would surprise people if they watch Convocation is how different even the people who were part of the Good Governance Coalition are on many issues. And I think one of the things that, and I know that was a process that wasn't overly transparent. They put together this coalition, but we all have different backgrounds, different practice types, different origin stories. I think that's like a Super Friends thing, but whatever. We have different, so we all come at these things differently. And those, for example, who work in like the legal aid system are a heck of a lot different than someone like myself who's worked in government or in regulatory areas. So we are different. And just even Peter and myself, Peter has been a highly successful Bay Street litigator for all his career. I am not a litigator. I'm, a corporate lawyer, a regulatory lawyer, a government kind of person. So we're totally different. We come in different perspectives. And so, I do think that the perspective among the Good Governance Coalition is different. But again, I don't believe in these silos. Once the election was over, we were 54, 'cause some of those are lay benchers as well. We're 54 benchers, right? And we all have different perspectives on things. And sometimes we see things the same way on issues, but there's been issues in the past where I voted the same as people who are part of the Stop Stop, and there's issues that the Stop Stop people voted the same as the majority of the people who are traditionally part of the Good Governance Coalition. So there's on issue by issue, there's different perspectives on things, and I think that's why, I feel that one of the things, if I would be elected treasurer, that I would really want to highlight is that like the convocation and the committees are a deliberative body. Like we actually are, there's a lot of smart people in the room with a lot of important perspectives, and that we debate and deliberate on these issues to come out with better outcomes. Right. And I think the factionization, I know that's not a word, but people being in like these factions, it doesn't lead to that. It leads to sadly, like we see in Ottawa or Queen's Park, where, they got the blue team and the red team and the orange team, and you're part of the team, and they're always wrong and they're right. That's not the way a board is supposed to operate. We're not a legislature. We're a board. And a board, where possible, is about cooperation and consensus building, not about conflict, right? You can debate things, but it's not, the purpose is not, there's not a, what's the word I'm looking for? There's not the Majesty's Royal Opposition or whatever the expression is. We're all board members. It's a board, not a legislature.
Yeah, because I think that's certainly important in kind of understanding that it's not like again everyone's voting in a block across the board on everything, and I guess it comes into play as no, as you're saying, November changed everything, and I don't know, how much you can sort of freely discuss, but I think that of course galvanizes everyone in the legal profession to say, well, what actually is going on here if this is the case, and what is sort of the roles or the knowledge that the various benchers and committee members and people had, and how to sort of respond when you're calling for transparency and looking forward, but you know,
Yeah, I
other
mean,
we'll
what I
want to
can
look back
say
first.
is
Yeah.
my name doesn't show up at all in the O'Connor report, because I, like the vast majority of benchers, became aware of this in November. I wasn't part of the compensation committee. Obviously, I wasn't the treasurer. I learned about this when it was brought to our attention. I mean, other people will have to speak about their actions, right? But for me, my involvement came as part of convocation. And, I, like a lot of my fellow benchers, and by the way, that's not, you mentioned about this group versus that group. We were all, whether traditional good governance people or traditional stop stoppers, we were all concerned when we learned about this. Concern's actually an understatement. So, like, it wasn't like there was like the good governance people were somehow not surprised. We were shocked, right? We were shocked and appalled and disappointed what was withheld with us, and obviously the stop stoppers, traditional stop stoppers, were too. So, you talk about building coalitions. That built actually a coalition of a lot of people. But you know, the worst thing about what happened, there's a lot of bad things about what happened, but the worst thing that happened is I think it played into people's worst fears that like things were happening at convocation that, weren't being disclosed to the profession, right? And I'd heard before I got elected as a bencher, the Law Society was paying, they were paying the CEO too much and this paying too much, and I was like, well, I'm not there, I don't have that information. But when I learned that those decisions had been made without even bringing it to convocation, like I was incensed. I was like, it's completely unacceptable. So to your point, I think it changed everything, and it changed everything that, I thought that, the old pattern of behavior just couldn't continue.
So then going forward, then looking at transparency, and I know you had some other points certainly in your vision, but what from that, from what you've learned till from November till today, and as the different layers kind of peeled off there with respect to what was done, what should have been done, what was being disclosed to the public, how many meetings you had in camera about whether this report should be available, or I think the exhibits are not available. And
Right.
I mean, how does that kind of all work? I mean, I don't know if maybe you can certainly, obviously,
Sure. How does what
in
happened?
terms of like, you want to talk about transparency, but like in terms of what went down, in terms of
Yeah.
what was disclosed and what was not
So
disclosed. Yeah.
the O'Connor report was disclosed pretty much unredacted. I mean, I think there's one or two things that were redacted to protect obviously certain employees who were not our CEO. Yeah, I've heard that the exhibits are something that people would like to see, and I think that will obviously be something that convocation will have to deliberate on. I mean, again, thinking about transparency, would it improve transparency? I mean, I guess it would. So, I mean, I don't know. The exhibits, quite honestly, are voluminous. I don't know exactly everything that's in there. Some of it may not move the needle too much. But again, if it would increase transparency, whether it makes certain people or the Law Society, not necessarily look good. I mean, at the end of the day, this happened and we have to be accountable for it. But I think, most of my focus, quite frankly, and this is, I know you're going to interview Murray, or you have interviewed Murray, is, my approach is mistakes were made and things were not working right. So how do we learn from those things and fix things for the future? Like I don't want to focus on the what happened in the past. I think what happened in the past frames what I think needs to be done in the future, but I think we do need to move forward with a productive because back to the timelines that I mentioned to you earlier, there's less than 2 years left in this mandate. And one of the things I keep on asking myself is what are we going to accomplish in the next 2 years? Right? Like the last year, I would say, got sidetracked with everything associated with the CEO's compensation. It was not the year that, in our current treasurer's defense, was not the year he planned for his first year. Right. And that's why I think some people said, well, give him a second year to actually do the things he wants to do. I've heard that argument, and people have to deliberate if that's a good approach or not. But, I'm mindful that there's less than 2 years to go. We have a strategic plan that, quite honestly, we haven't been focused on. We have operational things that we need to do. Like, for example, and this is, maybe not the sexiest thing in the world, but like we need to conduct a CEO recruitment campaign and hire a full-time CEO. Like at the end of the day, we as the board have one employee, and that's the CEO. We have an interim CEO, and she's doing a great job. But I mean, we need to decide what approach. We need to run a robust search and decide who the future permanent CEO is. So that's like a board operational priority that needs to get done, and there's other things we need to do. There's other things in the hopper. There's lots of policy things that are being considered. There's certain policy issues that have been out for consultation that are coming back to convocation for decision. So there's lots of not operational, but there's lots of like policy and operational things that we need to be focused on for the next 2 years, or we're going to lose another year or 2 years of inaction, right? We can't do that. It's not an option, in my opinion.
Now, I mean, I guess when you're making a policy, I mean, is there a potential that if you're focused on the policy aspects of kind of going forward, that you're missing, at least others would say maybe that we're kind of glossing over the severity of what
No,
happened.
not at all. I mean, one thing, and this has been announced, was announced actually by Peter, is we're doing a governance review. We've hired a governance expert to provide advice to convocation on structural governance changes. That's happening, and I think that's in response to some of the deficiencies that were identified in the O'Connor report, and deficiencies that were also found by not found, but have been identified by other benchers, including myself. I mean, I mentioned to you earlier, I sit on a bunch of other boards, and probably RICO, the Designated Administrative Authority, is the one. They do certain things that you would say, well, they're different than the Law Society, and that's fair enough. But they have certain things that they do that I think, oh, those would be great ideas if the Law Society did them. And so I think we need to look at best practices, not just in other legal regulatory bodies, but other bodies, whether it be, other non-for-profits, other colleges, other DAs. So yeah, the governance piece, and I'm talking structural governance, not governance election changes. We can talk about that in a second, but that's got to be done. And quite frankly with you, some of the things that Murray talks about and Murray's talked about addressing, I know he's kind of bringing up, these issues. I'm not saying that some of those issues are not issues that I think convocation needs to consider, but I guess what I'm saying is that if all we do is look backwards, we're gonna never move forward. So, you've got to focus on the forward, but not forget the back. So like I guess I'm saying you can do both and not just focus looking backwards.
So I'm looking forward. I mean, well, I guess kind of still a little bit of looking backwards because I know you mentioned the governance piece. I know there was a consultation
Yeah.
out earlier this year, and different kind of governance as you point out. But now, what are your thoughts there with respect to is the board too large? I mean, does that factor in terms of committee appointments you mentioned, right, as
Yeah.
well, right, of how that's equitable and diverse. So how does that all kind of come together with that proposal and your thoughts on it?
Yeah, so that the governance, now I'm talking about structural governance, not bylaw changes about how it processes, but like how many benches there are, how they're elected, that kind of thing. I guess I would call it more like almost like electoral reform too. Um, was out for consultation, and some of the feedback we got was very public, right? You probably read the things. There was a lot of feedback on, because the proposal was shrinking down the size of convocation dramatically, as well as adding an element of appointed versus elected benchers and changing potentially the way benchers are elected. So there was a lot in there, and there was a lot of, people can speak for themselves on their feedback, but there is a lot of really good feedback from people on some of the proposals. And I think we have to decide, we being convocation needs to decide how to deal with the feedback we received and decide how we can productively move forward. Like, is it there's enough in there that we can amend what we have? Do we have to look at a different approach? Like, those decisions haven't been made. Like, there's no secrecy there. The feedback's been received and decisions are going to need to be made about how to proceed. My personal view is having a smaller board would be positive, because 54 people is, quite a big group of people. Someone who's running for election right now, just trying to contact 54 people to try to get their vote, it's a big group of people. But I am quite concerned about making the board smaller for the sake of making the board smaller. And what I mean by that is the outcome can't just be a smaller board, because a smaller board wouldn't necessarily have the diversity of voices that you would get in a bigger board. And I've heard the argument, well, traditionally the board hasn't been as diverse. So I would say one of the things in a bigger board or a smaller board is we need to address the diversity. And again, diversity of different practice types, areas of the province, different even years of call, quite frankly. Like, I was talking to a younger member of Convocation, one of our benchers, and he was talking to me about some things about the call to the bar ceremony. And I kind of said to him, I said, well, I appreciate you bringing that to my attention. You know how many years ago I was called to the bar? Like, I don't even remember it. And it was like 8 or 9 years for him or something. And he's one of the younger benchers. I know that's still 8 or 9 years. But having different perspectives based on where you are in your career, you bring different things to the table. So I don't want to just shrink the size of the board only to lose those perspectives. And I also, as somebody who comes from a different background, like not Bay Street background, not a civil litigation background, I think we need more people And again, not me per se, though obviously I think I add a lot of value, but just people who have non-traditional legal backgrounds, people from government, people from the regulatory sector, in-house counsel, because that's a growing area of the profession. So, we need to make sure that if we shrink the board, that we enhance the diversity, and that's those sometimes are counter each other, right? So, I think work needs to be done on looking at the proposal. So I do support a smaller board, but not just smaller board for the sake of a smaller board.
And on that, you mentioned obviously a lot of the work happens in committees, and I mean, how are committees sort of created in terms of who sits on what committee, and I don't know if you have any thoughts on first. I mean, let me know how it works and what if you do
Yeah,
anything
so
with it.
it's funny you raise this topic because this is actually one of my number one pet peeves, and I think would separate me, though I haven't heard what Peter's view is of this. But most boards I've sat in the past have had some type of governance and nominations committee. So some group of the board, which includes the chair of the board, but it may include other people who, when it comes to populating committees, will usually put out a survey to board members and ask board members what they're interested in doing, potentially if they're interested in leadership opportunities, and usually do some competency matrix, right? What competencies do you have that makes, and then they'll take this information and then they'll populate the committees and they'll recommend that to the board. It's not the way the Law Society works. The Law Society is sadly more of a top-down approach where the treasurer may consult certain people, but whoever she or he is will determine which committees people sit on and who are the leaders on those committees. Now, treasurers would say, well, technically that needs to be approved by convocation, and that's true. But convocation is not like a committee that has all the inputs to make that decision. Like they basically look at a new slate of committees and say, well, that looks okay. Okay, I'll approve it. But like I said, I don't think that the treasurer should have basically the all the power to both make the recommendations alone, to make the recommendations on who should be in which committee and also who should be in which leadership roles. And I've been told that treasurers do consult certain people in those decisions. So I'm not saying when I said alone, I guess that's maybe a misstatement, but there's not a formal nominations or governance process. There's no process where it's again transparent how those decisions are made, and it's not just made by one person. And if I can pick up on one other thing, leadership roles are important because leadership roles on committees lead to future leadership for positions like the treasurer. So, how are we ensuring that the opportunity for leadership roles are equitable for board members? I mentioned that boards I've sat on ask people to check off a box and say, are they interested in leadership roles? Doesn't mean they're going to get one, but at least they've expressed an interest. The Paralegal Standing Committee, which I know you're familiar with, actually they elect their leadership of the committee. It's the only committee at the Law Society that elects it. I think that's an interesting model. I floated that idea as an idea that we should consider for other committees. But at the end of the day, we need a better system of populating our committees and determining our leadership. Otherwise, people who are close with the treasurer or people who are using it as leverage with the treasurer, whatever the case may be, it allows for too much abuse of the population of committees and leadership. So again, it's my little pet peeve. It needs to be rethought and it needs to be more transparent.
Yeah, I mean, is there ever any thought, you mentioned certainly looking at diversity with respect to, if we shrink the board, but somehow growing diversity. But something, from experience on the board, at least that I've sat on, is, we have committees, but people who aren't part of the board, could sit on the committee, right? Like, if
Yep.
we don't have enough members, so is there somebody who can't make a commitment, for the board, but they may be able to sit on one of these meetings, or even just make submissions or whatever it may be. That way, you may be getting more people involved who could then rise up into leadership and become maybe benchers the next time, and then from becoming benchers, as you said, maybe electing the chair or whatever of the committee. But that would allow for more representation, but not necessarily take the benchers away from being elected by the lawyers and the
Yeah.
paralegals.
So it's interesting you raise that because I've been on boards too that have that exact model. They basically have non-board members on certain committees, and then they use it as pipeline for future board. Because one of the number one challenges of being a bencher is when you start as a bencher, the Law Society is a big organization. It's complex. There's a lot of issues going on, and it takes you a while to get up to speed, right? My first year, quite frankly, was just trying to figure out how the place works. And so having people on committees, and granted, they may only be on one committee, but like it gives them a lens into the place that they can potentially use as a foundation if they ever do decide to run for the board. But also they bring a to your point as well, they are bringing a different perspective that may not be represented in convocation. So I actually am a strong supporter of having non-board members on committees, especially if you shrink the size of the board. That's one way to get some of the diverse perspectives. So that personally I mean, it would be a governance change, but I think is definitely something that should be considered. And I think would also strengthen the type of decisions that are made, right? Because governance is all about making informed decisions, right? To oversee an organization. And, you know, my belief is, two heads are better than one, five heads are better than two, like whatever. Like there is a number where that's maybe too many people, too many cooks, but like, if you alone are making decisions, that's usually not a great decision-making model.
Now, speaking of that, I mean, with respect to the treasurer, I mean, there's a lot of maybe not necessarily authority on paper, but in practicality, right? I mean, as you just alluded to, if you're going to be the treasurer and you get to kind of have the sway as to who sits on what committee, you don't necessarily want to cross Stephen. Otherwise, you're going to be,
Oh, yeah.
you
I
know.
mean, that's not the way I operate, but I understand the logic. Yeah, and I
But like,
think
I mean, again, you've talked about a nominating committee, but in terms of how else can you get more, voices that make sense in certain committees, right? Like, you would want someone like with a accounting background, in finance or something like that, right? I mean,
yeah, and that's why if this was I say a normal board, if this wasn't a board was mostly populated with lawyers, and I've sat on other boards where when you do board recruitment, the first thing you do is you do a competency matrix of the skill set of the people on your board, right? So like I sat on a board and I was the lawyer, right? I'm a lawyer, so every board needs a lawyer. But does a board need 40 lawyers, like 40, 60, whatever the case is? Any board has a CPA or an accountant or a bookkeeper, someone with other people who have expertise in HR. Because convocation is predominantly made up of lawyers, we don't, and paralegals, mostly lawyers though, we don't get that and legally trained. We do get some of that with lay benchers. I mean, the government does appoint lay benchers, and obviously we have a high caliber of lay benchers. The ones that I've served with, I'm very impressed with. But again, just knowing what competencies, because even within lawyers, like I'll use myself as an example. I'm a lawyer, but I actually am a good with numbers and have kind of a business background. So, I did end up in the Finance and Audit Committee because I actually asked to be on the Finance and Audit Committee. But, I think knowing which lawyers have a which benchers, excuse me, have a financial background and seeing that they're on committees that you can utilize that skill in populating the committees is an important job. And I think a nominations committee could do that. And again, bring others outside people, as we just talked about in the last question, together together to do that. But I did want to pick up on one other thing you said earlier about don't cross Stephen. I mean, one of the things that I read, there was a report done by Carol, I think it was Carol Hansel, and she did a report of what happened to Law Society. And she did say that there's a risk, or the society has too much, that, there can be retribution for people who talk out of line. They can lose committee assignments. Well, like, I don't want to run the Law Society like this is like a mob, and if you cross the mob boss, you end up in like whatever, the Detroit River or something like that. Like, this is, we're a board, and we need to be collegial, and we don't, we shouldn't be, being using retribution to people like, that's not my style, right? That's not a style. That's not a good leadership style, right? Like, that's not, you get the most out of people by treating them with respect and asking them to contribute, not by punishing them. So that's not the way I would operate.
Yeah, so I mean, on that lines, then, like, we're looking at transparency, and you said, healthy debate, and having more dialogue there. But is too much happening, in camera? Is too much, kind of, as you said, selectively being held back because we don't know what the optics are going to be. I think there was, a PR firm maybe, retained and stuff like that. Like, is it just kind of, feed the information out there, and let the public, I mean, not just necessarily the lawyers and the paralegals, but within reason, right? Obviously, there's certain, things that should be in camera, but is that kind of stifling people wanting to come and speak out about, here's what I'm doing on the law side, here's, some interesting developments, or what do you think?
Yeah. So one of the things I've heard from some of my fellow benchers is their concern about the leaking over the last year. And what I've heard from them basically is they feel they don't necessarily feel comfortable always speaking their mind, because then they're going to read about what they said the next day in the Toronto Star or the Globe and Mail, right? And so there does need to be an opportunity that, and this happens in government too. I was watching the swearing in of the cabinet, and they all basically swore an oath to keep cabinet information confidential. There is a place that certain things need to be held in camera for reasons of sensitivity and other things. But my underpinning of most things is that's the exception, not the norm. Then most things should be held in open session. And that, again, if things are held in open session, like, if people don't want to share things in open session, you got to ask yourself why. Why are they not sharing things? Like, what are they trying? At the end of the day, I think the I said the public, it's whoever watches. There's a lot of lawyers probably watching it. So I think doing more things in open session, again, leads to a better result. It's going to stop the leaking, because leaking, the things in camera create an opportunity to leak. I think it also allows for people to see actually what's being discussed and the issues, like, know the people that have run for convocation, how they're contributing. And also, you know some people take very strident positions, like very like dogmatic positions, and that will become obvious too, that they're not being productive, right? That they're seeing that they're just you know chest thumping, or whatever, banging their hat. So again, I'm for as many things in the open session as possible, and erring, if you err on the side of err on the side of an issue, you go open. If you watch the last convocation, I guess April, um, there ended up being a discussion about the financial and audit statements, and the treasurer, to his credit, said that some people said, well, we should do this in camera because there is discussion, and it's all open now. So there was discussion, about auditors' financial statements and stuff, and we did it all in public. And I think that was a very good step. And people could see exactly the debate, and what people were bad, struggling with as far as decision making. So, it's there's always a balance in things. There's always a balance in life. But as far as convocation goes, I mean, again, I'm a firm believer in transparency, as you've heard numerous times.
Yes, I wanted to. I think way back, you were getting into your vision, and we went off here, and we focused certainly a lot on transparency and governance. But anything else that you wanted to highlight in terms of your vision of if you are elected to be the treasurer that you may not have touched on thus far.
So stakeholder engagement and stakeholder outreach is key to me. So one of the things that the treasurer needs to do is not just talk to their fellow benchers. That's obviously important. I mean, I've just spent like the last 45 minutes talking about that. But talking to legal associations, talking to members that represent underserved groups, for example, in the legal area, especially as it relates to access to justice, obviously talking to the government, talking to other regulators, talking to different groups. So one of the things that I would definitely bring to the job is making myself accessible and meeting with people, because it's only through meeting with people and discussing about the issues are you going to be informed to make better decisions. So kind of making sure that I was accessible and that I, was accessible to the legal, not just the legal profession, to the public, to the government. And so I would focus a fair bit of time on stakeholder engagement. And, the Law Society has a lot of stakeholders because the legal profession interacts with pretty much all of society, right? So stakeholder engagement is definitely something that I would focus on, because we need, as a regulator, which protects the public interest, we need to be engaging with a whole bunch of stakeholders, and also because it helps uh, me as treasurer bring those perspectives to convocation, and other benchers would, of course, too, but bring those perspectives to convocation, and then ultimately make better policy and regulatory decisions.
I mean, I'd certainly echo that. I mean, I've been fortunate enough. A couple of the former treasurers have come in and said, here's what's going on with the Law Society, or one, that was the chair of the Law Society Tribunal. Here's what the Law
Yeah,
Society Tribunal is about. And I think it's important, right, that whatever the group is, that we hear from the treasurer as to what's happening, or not necessarily just the treasurer, but certainly starting with the treasurer, of what happens if we weren't able to tune in and stream convocation. What
yeah.
else is going on?
And I'll take it a step further. As much as I can control what the treasurer does, if I'm elected treasurer, I actually do believe that it's up to convocation, not convocation, sorry, it's up to the benchers themselves also to do stakeholder outreach. Like, it's important to, we all come from communities, we have that, but I think everybody, you it's going to help you do your job better as a bencher, the more people you talk to and the perspectives you bring. So it's not just me, it's not just the treasurer does the outreach. I think people need to do people need to do the outreach. So again, I come from a background where engagement is a key cornerstone, and it's something I would bring to the role as treasurer if I was elected.
And one of the things that some people have mentioned to me privately, is that, well, in other cases publicly as well, but the Bencher Code of Conduct kind of may stifle that point, right? If you're, if you say something, here are what my thoughts are, um, especially if it was, in camera or confidential, or what may be, and I
Yeah.
felt like I wanted to share with the public, with here's what's going on, but I was afraid that, especially again, as you said, if you're a new member, newly elected bencher, and you're kind of figuring things out in your first year, and like, should I do that, or if I say this, is this going to have ramifications you alluded to in one of the reports? What are your thoughts on, is that kind of
Yeah.
preventing dialogue, or is it
So, so
maybe?
it's an interesting line, because it's come up a lot this past year. What, if anything, can benchers say publicly? And, I think it was quite well reported that, we were told, obviously, when things were discussed in camera prior to the release of the O'Connor report, there was not much we could say publicly. And then at one point, the Law Society put out a statement, and, would gave a particular view of what happened, which, now that the O'Connor report has come out, I guess you could see that while it was it told us starting the statement, there was more nuance there. There's more to the story, right? The O'Connor report's a big report. There's a lot to the story. But, obviously, as benchers, we couldn't be out there talking about these things. So Look, I do think that I don't believe in stifling conversation. I do believe, though, that there are certain things that when they're discussed in camera, because they need to be kept confidential, should be kept confidential. Um, some of my fellow benchers, I mentioned this earlier, are very upset by the leaking that occurred. I also am, because it undercuts trust in each other. But I would also say that that leaking was, for the most part, at least in my opinion, was was a symptom, not a cause of a problem. It was a symptom because there wasn't trust, because it was a symptom because things weren't being transparent. So I think that, like, there's a right place and a right time for certain type of information. I also believe, because I believe in transparency, and I've used that word so many times, it's probably getting boring now, but is I think that it will allow there'll be less, like, a gap between what's out there publicly and what benchers can say. You know, it became a big issue when the Law Society wasn't saying anything or being very selective, and benchers couldn't say anything. So again, I think having more things in open session, and obviously greater transparency, I think helps address some of the issues you raised.
Now, one of the other things that kind of came up, as a result of all this is the uh, again, no, you're on different boards. Maybe it's different there, but the role of the staff, the various staff, and
Yeah.
the inner workings, with the board. I mean, obviously, I've spoken to Murray, and he has a whole
Yeah.
case record, right, of litigation that to get information. But how does that kind of fit in? I mean, I know you have other board experience. That is there an issue there? Is it just because of who wants the information? Is there? I mean, should that even be a factor, right? I mean, as you're saying,
So
well,
yeah, no. So, most boards that I been on, put the Law Society aside, if a board member requests information, as long as it's not for personal use, like they're involved in something, staff will provide it, unless it's unaccessible, like it can't be, or it'd be very time consuming to get, and then maybe there is an alternative. You're right. The Law Society has a history, and Murray's been involved in litigation, so he's, can speak firsthand. I can only talk about the history that I'm aware of not sharing certain information with benchers. And I think that's generally a shame. Like, benchers to make informed decision need information. And we've learned through what happened as it relates to the CEO's compensation, that information was withheld. So, I think the benchers should get information so they can make informed decisions. I think if certain benchers want to ask for certain information and it's clearly outside of the scope of their oversight responsibilities, and potentially has their own personal issues at heart of the heart of the request, and not, oversight, then I think obviously there needs to be a process to vet that. But I think generally, staff support the board as far as doing their governance and oversight work. And again, it would be up to the CEO to get her staff to fulfill requests, because again, CEOs are the only employee that a board has, or the convocation has, as a CEO, but through the CEO, through staff, to get the necessary information. So, again, Murray's has a long history of certain requests that he can speak to, but I think my general view is that, more information makes better decisions. So if board members require information, that they should get the information, unless there's a practical reason that that information can't be provided.
now, Stephen, last couple of questions here as we get to the end. Now, obviously, people listening don't directly get to vote, which may surprise them, but they certainly
Yeah,
can reach out to their benchers and say, I really think Stephen has some great ideas, or Murray, or Peter, or whatever,
right.
whoever. But what would you say then, I guess, in terms of looking at yourself via the other candidates? What is support for Stephen looking like? If you can speak to
Sure.
the general public there that may be
So
listening.
this is my elevator speech, the job interview elevator speech. So, I'm bringing a different vision to this role than I think is currently. As I haven't seen what Peter is proposing. I've heard seen what Murray is. I'm proposing something different. I've provided a lot of practical changes that I would make to improve trust and increase transparency, and also lead to a more cohesive uh, environment for important decisions to be made. So again, I have a vision and I think I have experience. I didn't talk about, you asked me about some of my background. I have vast board experience, including having served as president of the Canadian Bar Association, and in that case, I was the president of an organization of close to 38,000 lawyers. I think it's slightly bigger now, but when I was president, it was 38,000 lawyers. I had a board that I was the chair of and served in various capacities there. And I've served on numerous other boards and in a chair capacity, including a board provides credit counseling societies, a healthcare board, and I'm currently, as I mentioned, on the board of RICO. So I have vast board experience that I can use and apply to the Law Society. And I appreciate the Law Society has a unique governance model, unlike any other board, but that a lot of those skills are transferable. And I think those who've worked with me on those boards would talk about the leadership that I've provided during my role on those boards. So again, I think I have a vision and I have the experience to be able to do a good job in this role.
And then I guess lastly, if you could speak directly, maybe some of the benchers will tune in and who do have a vote, and I think it's a secret ballot, and I believe it's tiered, like they're like a
There
runoff.
is. So the way it would work, it's interesting because a lot of benchers don't even know. They've been asking me, how does it vote? Is because there's three candidates, there's a possibility that no one candidate will get 50% on the first ballot. And the criteria is you need to get 50% of the votes cast. So if there's three people and none of those individuals get 50% of the vote, then the lowest the lowest vote getter, they go to their votes, and whoever their second choice is, those votes get aligned, and then obviously there'd only be two left, so somebody would get over 50%. So it is a preferential, or I don't know if that's the right language, but basically you get to vote for your first and second choice. So, a lot will come down to whether or not any of us can get 50% on the first ballot. If any of us does, then good on them. But if it goes to a second ballot, then people's second choice comes into play.
Yeah, so I think that's interesting there, how it's done, and is there, I guess, a revote, kind of like
No, you
or
vote at the same time. So, I mean, this is the way it was explained to me is you vote 1, 2 at the time. Someone said you vote 1, 2, 3. And I said, no, you'll never get to your third choice. So you never vote 1, 2, 3, but you will vote 1, 2. And that your second choice only comes in if your first choice, if there is a second ballot and your first choice is the lowest vote getter. So that's how it works.
Yeah, so on that note, then, with respect to those who do have a vote, if they are listening, and again, this might be one
Hopefully
of
they are. I
one
can
of the
say
few
that.
opportunities I think you could speak directly to the whole group without sending individual emails and stuff like that. But
I have been sending individual emails and talking to a lot of them. I wish it was as easy as just talking to you. But I'll say something which maybe makes me unusual. I actually like campaigning because it gives me a chance to talk about issues with my fellow benchers. And most of the time when I'm talking to my fellow benchers, the conversation is not always about me and what I want to do. I want to hear from them and what their priorities are. So it's always a good way. It's a two-way conversation. So, but if they're listening, which I hope they're listening, I would say, you've seen me over the last couple of years. You've seen how I operate in convocation. You see how I've been respectful to people, whether I share your views or have a different view. Uh, I put forward my vision and how I would regain trust in convocation, and then in turn that would lead to trust with the public and the profession, the legal profession, and within government. So I have a plan, and I think I have the experience, and I would ask for your support during this election.
perfect. So, Stephen, so thanks so much for taking the time and speaking with me about the law study, everything that's going on, and your candidacy for treasurer. Thank you again for everyone for tuning in. Take care.
Thanks a lot. Bye now.